An essential part of the Buddha's teachings is that in the practice we have to learn how to make use of things that eventually we're going to have to learn to let go. We know that at some point the practice involves letting go of desire, but you need to cultivate skillful desire to get to that point. Ultimately, it involves getting to the total end of fabrication, but the Eightfold Noble Path is a type of fabrication. As the Buddha once said, it's the ultimate level of fabrication. In fact, when you look at the factors of the path, you realize that they're made up of the aggregates: form, feeling, perception, fabrication, consciousness. These all have to play a role in the path, which means that we have to learn how to change our attitude towards the aggregates. Instead of just clinging to them as ourselves, we learn how to use them as elements in the path. The important point here is to realize that these things have to be used in a skillful way. When you come to the path, you have to reflect on skills that you've developed in the past. As an artist, as a cook, as a carpenter, as a musician, whatever skills you've worked on in the past, it's good to reflect on how you became skillful, and particularly how you learn how to deal with mistakes. Learning from your mistakes is essential to developing any kind of skill. It's expected that you're going to make mistakes. The teacher tries to help you avoid the really unnecessary ones by pointing them out. In other words, some mistakes are more avoidable than others. But a large part of the practice lies in learning how to deal from your mistakes and not get knocked off course by them. We all like to hear that there's a stage in the practice when you finally attain a certain level of awareness or a certain level of insight that is guaranteed that from that point on nothing you would do will be a mistake. Sometimes you hear that people talking about the choicelessness of the path. You finally get on the path and you realize that there's only one thing to do, and you just do what the path tells you to do, or what seems right at any one time. And you'll be guaranteed that there won't be any mistakes. That's not the way it works. Even arahants make mistakes. Their virtue in terms of the basics of a virtuous life, i.e. the 5 precepts, are unshakable. They don't make those mistakes anymore. But simple mistakes in saying the wrong thing to the wrong person, that's simply human. It has nothing to do with defilements in the mind, simply the fact that we are human people, human beings, with limitations. What's different about arahants is they continue to learn from their mistakes. They don't get knocked off course by them, because there's no conceit that's going to be challenged by the mistake, or destroyed by the mistake, or feel threatened by the mistake. But for those of us on the path, that's an issue we have to deal with, this issue of conceit, or narcissism. We don't like to think that we're going to have to make mistakes, but there's no other way you're going to learn. This is why the Buddha gives so many instructions on how to learn from your mistakes, how to deal with a mistake. So it actually becomes an important element in the path. There's instructions to Rahula. When you realize that you've done something that's been harmful, 1, you resolve not to repeat it, and then 2, you go talk it over with someone else who's on the path to see what insight you can get from them. I.e., you admit the mistake, you learn how to recognize it. And that involves developing a fair amount of perceptiveness right there. And also learning from the counsel of others. We sometimes think that the Buddha's instructions to the Galamas is to go by your own sense of right and wrong. But if you look carefully there, even that doesn't In fact, it has nothing to do with what the Buddha said. He said you can't go on totally on the instructions of others, but you can't go on your own preconceived ideas about what's right and wrong. You have to look at what you do and the results of what you've done and what you're doing, and learn to recognize when you've caused harm and when you haven't. And at the same time, you take into consideration the counsel of the wise. And that, of course, requires that you learn how to recognize who's wise and not. So it does throw the whole issue back on you, but it's not that you have to totally reinvent the Dharma wheel as you practice. There is guidance. And when you learn how to make the best use of guidance, that gives you quite a leg up right there. There's another passage where someone comes to the Buddha, as a student of the Jains. And the Jains were teaching that whoever kills, steals, has illicit sex, whoever lies, whoever takes intoxicants, is going to go to hell. This person wanted to know what the Buddha had to say about that, and the Buddha says, well, if you hear that teaching and you realize you've done these things in the past, that's pretty much consigns you to hell right there. It makes it hopeless. His teaching is that these activities are unwise. They should be avoided because they cause harm. You look at what you've done and you realize in the past you've made mistakes like this. So what's the proper attitude to have is to resolve not to do them again. At the same time, realize that if you let yourself get tied up in remorse about your past mistakes, that's not going to undo the old mistake. And at the same time, it's going to make it less likely that you're going to be able to do well in the future, because remorse saps your strength. So it's more learning to recognize a mistake and resolve, I'm not going to repeat it. And then the Buddha says you develop the sublime attitudes: limitless goodwill, limitless compassion, limitless empathetic joy, limitless equanimity. Learn how to cultivate these emotions, because they help keep you on the right track, strengthen your resolve not to be harmful, and also teaching you where your limitations are, what you can do, what you can't do in terms of correcting the situation within yourself and with the world around you. Again, these are fabrications too. It's not that our nature is innately kind or innately bad. These are things you have to learn how to cultivate. They're fabrications. So what happens when you come up against some ill will inside you, or some resentment, or an inability to accept the situation as it is? Well, you look at that emotion, you realize it's composed of all the different elements of fabrication. There's the way you breathe. There are the directed thoughts, the way you direct your thinking around that topic, the way you evaluate what's happening, your feelings and your perceptions about what's happening. These are all the elements of fabrication that go into any thought, any emotion. So on the one hand, you want to learn how to take your unskillful emotions apart when you find yourself thinking in an unskillful way. When there's an unskillful emotion that comes up with regard either to yourself or somebody else, ask yourself, what's the breathing that's going on here? How does the breathing affect that emotion? What if I were to make the breath more skillful? In other words, help to get that emotion out of the body. And then look at how you're thinking about the issue. Is there some way you could change your thoughts about the issue? Look at it from a different perspective. A lot of the Buddha's teachings, say on anger, are just that. Look at the situation from another angle. Look at the good in the person who makes you angry. After all, you need their good as much as they do, because if all you can see are the bad traits of other people, it's like being in a desert. You're hot, tired, trembling, thirsty.